Imagine standing on a misty riverbank 12,000 years ago. Agriculture does not exist. There are no permanent cities, no written languages, no metal tools, and no guarantee that your family will survive the coming winter. Most human groups spend their days in a grueling, relentless pursuit of wild game, constantly on the move, burning nearly as many calories as they hunt. Yet, along a quiet stretch of water, a small band of humans has done something unthinkable. They have settled down. They build sturdy, permanent shelters. Their children are healthier, their elders live longer, and their granaries, carved from stone and wood, are brimming with preserved food. They did not achieve this by inventing the plow or domesticating livestock. They did it by mastering a resource that was invisible to most, the silent, teeming world beneath the water's surface. Long before the first seed was planted, before the first brick of Jericho was laid, and before kings ruled over empires, one profession quietly altered the trajectory of human evolution. Fishing did not just keep early humans alive, it laid the structural blueprint for human civilization itself. Yet today, we often view fishing as a humble, primitive trade or a relaxing weekend hobby. We forget that for thousands of years, fishermen were the world's original explorers, the pioneers of international trade, the master engineers of maritime technology, and the secret force that funded empires and sparked global wars. How did a simple quest for food spark the birth of permanent human settlements? Why did ancient empires treat humble fish salters like high-ranking military strategists? And how did a single species of fish trigger the discovery of the New World centuries before Columbus? To understand how our modern world was built, we have to look past the farmers and the soldiers and return to the water. For centuries, historians believed that complex human societies were born on land. The standard textbook narrative was simple: humans learned to farm, built villages, accumulated a food surplus, and finally had the leisure time to develop art, religion, and governance. There was only one problem with this theory. Archaeological discoveries keep proving it wrong. In deep caves along the coast of South Africa, archaeologists unearthed something extraordinary: dense heaps of ancient seashells, fish bones, and fire-scorched hearts dating back over 100,000 years. These weren't the remains of a temporary hunting camp. They were evidence of an ancient lifestyle centered entirely around aquatic life. When early humans relied solely on hunting land mammals, life was a high-stakes gamble. Tracking a mammoth or a herd of deer required enormous energy, carried a high risk of injury, and often ended in failure. But coastal and river environments offered something terrestrial forests could not: predictable abundance. Tides rose and fell with mathematical precision, leaving behind exposed shellfish, crabs, and trapped fish in rock pools. Rivers experienced seasonal fish runs, where millions of protein-rich creatures traveled along predictable routes every single year. For early humans, mastering these aquatic patterns was a cheat code for survival. More importantly, seafood transformed the human body itself. Marine life is uniquely rich in omega-3 fatty acids, docosahexaenoic acid, DHA, and essential minerals, the exact chemical building blocks required to fuel rapid brain development. Many evolutionary anthropologists now believe that the expansion of the human brain during the late Stone Age was directly accelerated by a marine-based diet. We did not just catch fish because we were smart, we became smart because we caught fish. As techniques advanced, early humans moved beyond simply gathering stranded marine life. They began to invent bone gorges, sharpened, double-pointed splinters of bone attached to twisted plant fiber lines, appeared over 40,000 years ago. Soon after came woven basket traps, barbed spears, and eventually the earliest fish nets. By the time the last ice age began to recede around 12,000 years ago, fishing groups in places like Japan's Jomon culture were building permanent villages and firing complex pottery thousands of years before agriculture took root in the Fertile Crescent. They had solved the fundamental problem of human existence: how to secure a permanent food supply without moving. But as coastal populations grew, these early communities hit an invisible wall: fresh fish spoils in a matter of hours. A massive catch could feed a village for 2 days, but by the third day, it was poison. If fishing was going to build true civilizations, someone needed to figure out how to stop time. The solution to the spoilage problem did not come from a laboratory or a royal palace. It emerged from the muddy shores of ancient lagoons. Sometime around 3000 BCE, workers in the Nile Delta noticed that fish left in shallow, sun-dried coastal pans did not rot. The natural salt pulled moisture out of the flesh, creating an environment where bacteria could not survive. The invention of fish preservation changed human history forever. A perishable, localized resource was instantly transformed into a durable, transportable, and highly valuable currency. In ancient Egypt, fishing transitioned from a subsistence activity to a heavily regulated state industry. The Nile was the beating heart of the kingdom, overflowing each summer and leaving behind millions of fish trapped in receding pools. Pharaohs recognized the immense economic power of this harvest. They established royal fisheries, taxed every catch, and deployed armies of state-employed fishermen using massive dragnets that required dozens of men to pull. Egyptian scribes recorded meticulous ledgers of dried and salted fish. It became the primary fuel for the massive workforce that constructed the pyramids of Giza. Without cheap, shelf-stable aquatic protein, the monumental architecture of the ancient world simply could not have been built. While Egypt mastered freshwater river fishing, another power was rising across the Mediterranean that would turn sea fishing into a global empire. The Phoenicians, a civilization of master mariners occupying the coast of modern-day Lebanon, looked at the Mediterranean Sea not as a barrier, but as a highway. To sustain their long-distance trading voyages, they needed a food source that could last for months at sea. They turned to the Atlantic bluefin tuna. Every spring, massive schools of giant tuna migrated through the Strait of Gibraltar into the warm waters of the Mediterranean. The Phoenicians engineered a brilliant and terrifying fishing method known as the almadraba or matanza. Using a complex labyrinth of heavy nets anchored to the seafloor, they funneled thousands of giant fish into a central kill chamber, where fishermen in boats slaughtered and harvested the catch in a coordinated frenzy. The Phoenicians built salting factories all along the coasts of Spain and North Africa. They didn't just sell fish, they sold a refined luxury product. They discovered that fermenting fish guts with salt produced a rich, savory liquid packing an intense punch of natural glutamate. Centuries later, the Roman Empire took this idea and turned it into an obsession. They called it garum. To the modern palate, garum sounds repulsive. Fish intestines, small whole fish, and blood left to rot in large stone vats under the scorching Mediterranean sun for weeks until liquid dissolved into a clear, amber sauce. But to the Romans, garum was liquid gold. It was the ketchup, soy sauce, and MSG of the ancient world combined. Garum was added to virtually every Roman dish, from roasted meats to wine and desserts. Top-grade garum, produced in factories in southern Hispania, modern Spain, sold for astronomical prices. A single amphora of premium fermented fish sauce could cost more than a field worker earned in a year. The garum industry became so vast that it drove the development of Roman maritime infrastructure. Specialized merchant ships carrying tens of thousands of sealed clay amphorae crisscrossed the Mediterranean, supplied by an invisible army of coastal fishermen working day and night. Garum made men extraordinarily wealthy, created international trade routes, and fed the Roman legions from Britannia to Syria. But this colossal commercial machine hid a secret vulnerability. The entire system relied on a single fragile assumption, that the supply of fish would never run out. When the Western Roman Empire collapsed in the 5th century CE, the sophisticated trade networks that carried garum across Europe dissolved. Cities shrank, roads fell into disrepair, and long-distance maritime commerce plummeted. Europe fell into the Middle Ages. Yet, amidst the chaos, the demand for fish did not disappear. In fact, it exploded. The driver of this new fishing boom was not a wealthy elite or a conquest-hungry emperor. It was the Catholic Church. As Christianity spread across Europe, religious authorities instituted strict fasting rules. On certain days, believers were forbidden from eating meat, the flesh of warm-blooded land animals associated with lust and worldly passion. At first, these fast days were limited to Lent, the 40 days preceding Easter, but over time, the Church expanded the restriction. Wednesdays, Fridays, Saturdays, and various holy days were added to the calendar. By the 10th century, Europeans were forbidden from eating meat for more than 150 days every year. For millions of people, fish was no longer an occasional alternative. It was a spiritual requirement. Local rivers and lakes were quickly overfished to meet this staggering demand. Freshwater species like pike, carp, and trout grew scarce near major population centers. Furthermore, medieval cities were notoriously filthy. Raw sewage and industrial waste from leather tanners choked local waterways, devastating river ecosystems. Europe faced a severe protein crisis. To solve it, fishermen had to leave the safety of rivers and venture deep into the treacherous, icy waters of the North Sea and the Atlantic Ocean. They were looking for one specific target: the Atlantic herring. Herring were called the silver of the sea. Moving in massive shoals containing hundreds of millions of fish, these small, oily creatures migrated through the cold northern waters. Catching them required a leap in maritime technology. Dutch fishermen answered the challenge by inventing a revolutionary vessel, the herring boos. Introduced in the 15th century, the herring boos was a massive, ocean-going wooden ship designed to act as a mobile floating factory. It carried a crew of up to 30 men and deployed drift nets over a mile long. More importantly, the Dutch mastered a breakthrough technique called gutting or gibbing. As soon as the herring were pulled onto the deck, crew members used specialized knives to quickly remove the fish's gills and internal organs, leaving the pancreas intact. The enzymes released by the pancreas helped cure the fish while it sat packed in wooden barrels filled with brine. Because the processing happened immediately at sea, Dutch herring could remain fresh and delicious for over a year. The herring bus allowed Dutch fleets to stay out at sea for weeks at a time, harvesting millions of fish while their competitors were forced to return to port every night. This single innovation transformed the Netherlands from a modest, swampy delta into an economic superpower. It was said that the grand golden city of Amsterdam was built on herring bones. The wealth generated by the herring trade funded the Dutch Golden Age, financed the world's first multinational corporation, the Dutch East India Company, and sparked furious, bloody naval wars with England, who looked on with envy as Dutch fleets harvested fortunes right off the British coast. While the Dutch were building an empire on herring in the North Sea, an even greater mystery was unfolding further west, in the dark, frozen expanse of the North Atlantic. Long before Christopher Columbus set sail, a group of solitary fishermen had quietly discovered a secret that would reshape the map of the world. To understand this secret, we must look at a fish that shaped human history more than any other, the Atlantic cod. Unlike the oily herring, cod is an extraordinary biological machine. Its flesh contains virtually no fat. Instead, cod stores its oils entirely in its oversized liver. This unique biology meant that when cod was salted and dried in the cold sea wind, it didn't go rancid like oily fish. It dried rock hard, turned into a durable plank of pure protein, and could preserve for up to 5 years without spoiling. To a medieval traveler, soldier, or sailor, dried cod, known as stockfish or bacalao, was the ultimate survival food. You could throw a piece of dried cod into a pot of boiling water weeks, months, or years later, and it would reconstitute into a dense, nutritious meal. The masters of this trade were the Basques, a mysterious ethnic group living in the mountainous region between modern-day France and Spain. By the 14th century, Basque fishermen were supplying markets across Europe with astonishing quantities of high-quality salted cod. European merchants were baffled. The local cod stocks around Britain, Norway, and Iceland were well known, but the volume of fish the Basques were bringing into port was mathematically impossible for European waters to support. Where were they finding these vast ocean treasures? The Basques kept their fishing grounds a fiercely guarded secret. Navigators swore oaths of silence under threat of death. Logbooks were coded or destroyed. For over a century, Basque fleets sailed west into the terrifying, mist-shrouded waters of the open Atlantic every spring, returning months later with ships bursting with cod. It wasn't until centuries later, when historians cross-referenced ancient shipping logs and navigational records, that the truth emerged. The Basques had crossed the Atlantic Ocean. Decades before Columbus landed in the Bahamas, Basque fishermen were dropping their hooks onto the Grand Banks, a shallow, nutrient-rich underwater plateau off the coast of Newfoundland, Canada. Here, where the icy Labrador Current meets the warm Gulf Stream, existed the dense concentration of marine life on planet Earth. The water was so thick with cod that early explorers described dropping wooden baskets weighted with stones into the sea and pulling them up crammed with fish. When John Cabot, sailing under the English flag, officially discovered Newfoundland in 1497, he reported finding dozens of anonymous Basque and Breton fishing vessels already anchored in the bays, quietly drying their catches on the beaches as they had done for generations. They didn't care about claiming land for kings or converting native populations to Christianity. They didn't care about gold or glory. They cared about fish. The discovery of the Grand Banks triggered a global maritime rush. Kings in London, Paris, and Lisbon quickly realized that cod was more lucrative than silver. Gold from the Americas caused devastating inflation in Europe, but fish fed growing industrial cities, sustained navies, and generated reliable, continuous wealth. England, France, Spain, and Portugal deployed massive commercial fishing fleets across the Atlantic. These voyages required larger, more maneuverable ships, precise astronomical navigation, and crews capable of surviving months in the world's most dangerous waters. The North Atlantic cod fishery became the ultimate training ground for the navies that would conquer the globe. The sailors who manned the warships of the British Empire and the French Navy learnt their trade as teenage fishermen dodging icebergs and battling gale-force storms on the Grand Banks. Yet this booming global trade carried a dark, tragic underbelly. In the 17th and 18th centuries, dried cod became inextricably linked with the darkest chapter of human history, the transatlantic slave trade. Low-grade salted cod, cheap, dense, and virtually indestructible, became the primary food source used by European colonial powers to feed millions of enslaved humans working on sugar, tobacco, and cotton plantations in the Caribbean and the American South. Plantation owners calculated that it was cheaper to import dried fish from the North Atlantic to feed enslaved workers than to allocate land and labor to grow food locally. The wealth of New England, the expansion of British maritime dominance, and the cruel machinery of plantation slavery were all bound together by a single, unyielding thread: the harvest of the sea. For thousands of years, the relationship between fishermen and the ocean was defined by human physical limits. No matter how skilled a fisherman was, he was constrained by the strength of his arms, the size of his wooden boat, the wind in his sails, and the unpredictable fury of the weather. The ocean was viewed as an infinite, untamable wilderness, a domain so vast that human activity could never truly diminish its abundance. In 1883, the legendary biologist Thomas Henry Huxley stood before the International Fisheries Exhibition in London and confidently declared, "I believe that the cod fishery, the herring fishery, the pilchard fishery, the mackerel fishery, and probably all the great sea fisheries are inexhaustible. That is to say, that nothing we do has any serious effect on the number of fish." It was a comforting thought. It was also catastrophically wrong. Even as Huxley spoke, a quiet technological revolution was transforming fishing from an ancient craft into an industrial destruction machine. The first shock to the marine world came with the introduction of steam power. In the late 19th century, British shipbuilders began equipping traditional fishing boats with steam engines. Steam trawlers no longer depended on the wind. They could pull massive, heavy nets across the ocean floor regardless of currents or weather, carving deep furrows through fragile marine habitats. Then came diesel engines, synthetic nylon nets that never rotted, and mid-20th century military advancements. During World War II, governments developed advanced sonar, sound navigation and ranging to track enemy submarines. When the war ended, commercial fishing companies bought the surplus sonar technology and mounted it on fishing vessels. For the first time in history, fish had nowhere to hide. Fishermen no longer had to read the birds, watch the water's surface, or rely on generations of accumulated local knowledge. They could peer through hundreds of feet of dark water and pinpoint entire shoals with mathematical precision. Next came the factory freezer trawler, a colossal floating industrial complex capable of staying at sea for months at a time. These ships didn't just catch fish. They processed, flash froze, and packaged thousands of tons of seafood every single day directly on board. In the 1960s and 1970s, armadas of giant foreign factory ships descended upon the ocean's richest fishing grounds. The impact was swift and devastating. For centuries, the Grand Banks off Newfoundland had yielded hundreds of thousands of tons of cod every year without breaking. But under the weight of modern industrial harvesting, the unthinkable began to happen. The catches started to shrink. Local inshore fishermen, using traditional hook and line methods, warned government regulators that the fish were disappearing. They reported catching smaller and smaller cod, a classic biological indicator that a fish population is under extreme stress, with adults being wiped out before they can reproduce. Politicians and corporate fishing executives ignored the warnings. They adjusted their computer models, blamed natural climate fluctuations, and kept pushing fleets to catch more to cover the cost of expensive new ships. The breaking point arrived in the early 1990s. In 1992, scientists conducted a survey of the Grand Banks cod population. What they found shocked the global scientific community. The breeding population of northern cod had collapsed by an incredible 99% in less than 2 decades. The richest fishery on Earth, a biological wonder that had fed millions of humans for over 500 years, was functionally extinct. On July 2, 1992, the Canadian government announced a complete moratorium on northern cod fishing. In a single day, an industry that had defined an entire culture for half a millennium came to a screeching halt. Over 35,000 fishermen and plant workers lost their jobs overnight, the largest single industrial layoff in Canadian history. Ghost towns appeared along the coast of Newfoundland as young people fled to cities in search of work. It was a profound, terrifying wake-up call for humanity. The ocean was not infinite. The fish were not inexhaustible. The collapse of the Atlantic cod proved that human technology had finally outpaced nature's ability to heal itself. Today, the story of the fisherman has entered its most complex, dangerous, and transformative chapter. We live in a world where the global appetite for seafood is at an all-time high. Over 3 billion people rely on wild and farmed seafood as their primary source of protein, and the fishing industry supports the livelihoods of over 10% of the world's population. To meet this relentless demand while wild fish stocks decline, humanity has been forced to look back to its distant roots and reimagine them. Enter the rise of modern aquaculture, or fish farming. Today, for the first time in human history, more than half of all seafood consumed by humans is not caught in the wild. It is raised in floating ocean pens, land-based recirculating tanks, and coastal estuaries. In many ways, humanity is undergoing a second agricultural revolution. Just as our distant ancestors transitioned from hunting wild land animals to farming crops and livestock 10,000 years ago, we are now transitioning from hunting the ocean to farming the sea. Yet, aquaculture brings its own complex set of challenges. High-density fish farms can spread diseases to wild populations, pollute delicate coastal ecosystems with waste, and often rely on wild-caught small fish to produce feed for farmed predatory species like salmon and tuna. Scientists and engineers are racing to solve these problems, developing plant-based feeds, land-based closed-loop systems, and offshore automated farms powered by renewable energy. At the same time, the world of wild capture fishing has turned into a high-tech game of cat and mouse played out across the global commons. On the open ocean, beyond the 200-mile exclusive economic zones of individual nations, lies the high seas. Here, unregulated, unreported, and illegal high-UU fishing has become a major global crisis. Dark fleets turn off their satellite transponders to illegally cross into protected marine reserves, harvesting vulnerable species and depleting ecosystems in the dead of night. To combat this, a new kind of fisherman has emerged, the conservation scientist and the digital investigator. Using artificial intelligence, high-resolution satellite tracking, and environmental DNA testing, eDNA, where scientists can identify every fish species present in a bay simply by analyzing a single liter of seawater. Investigators can track fishing vessels anywhere on Earth in real time, exposing illegal catches before they reach port. Around the globe, a growing movement towards sustainable fishing is proving that recovery is possible. Where strict science-based catch limits, marine protected areas, MPAs, and traditional community-managed fisheries have been established, marine life has rebounded with astonishing speed. Ecosystems that were on the brink of death a generation ago are flourishing once again, proving that if humans give the ocean room to breathe, nature possesses an incredible capacity to heal. Look closely at our modern world, and you will see the indelible fingerprints of the ancient fishermen everywhere. The GPS coordinates guiding your smartphone were built on navigational principles pioneered by sea captains searching for distant fishing grounds. The global supply chains that ship fresh produce across continents rely on refrigeration systems descended from Dutch herring salting ships and Roman garum factories. The international law of the sea, maritime border disputes, and coastal city geography were all shaped by centuries of conflict over who owned the right to drop a net into the water. Fishing is the single remaining thread connecting modern industrial society to our deep hunter-gatherer past. When a fisherman casts a net or drops a line into the sea today, they are participating in an unbroken human tradition that stretches back over 100,000 years. It is an ancient, quiet contract between humanity and the deep blue world, a relationship built on courage, ingenuity, patience, and respect. The story of the fisherman is not merely a chapter in human history. It is the story of how we survived, how we evolved, how we built our world, and ultimately, how we must learn to save it.